Hello, everyone, and welcome to our meeting on the community engagement planning that we've been doing. This is our third meeting, and we're ready to basically come to the point where the rubber meets the road. So I'd like to start our meeting with the way we usually start our meetings, which is talking about things that have been awesome in our lives, either since the last meeting or last 24 hours or reflection over the last year, whatever works for you. So I turn it over to whoever wants to start, and we'll run through finding out what's awesome in your life.
I'll start. I cooked...
and introduce yourself. I'm sorry, Annette.
My name's Annette Sandberg, and I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I just returned from a road trip to Nebraska to see my parents, who are dealing with some stressors, health stuff. And I managed to cook 30 meals and freeze them in 5 days. That's my accomplishment.
That's huge.
Thank you. I was quite impressed.
Yes.
So this is Justin Pollock. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I think my awesome is my family finally got our summer vacation plans scheduled, so we're going to do a week of family excursions in the Adirondacks and a little bit of family camp time.
Wow, that sounds great.
That sounds like so much fun.
And are you staying at a cabin, or what are you doing?
Yeah, we're going to be on Lake George. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Justin. That makes me very jealous.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Me too.
Yes.
I'm Stacy from New Westminster, BC, and my awesome is that the end of June is like annual general meetings and charity filings and society filings and gaming reports, and all that paperwork is done.
Yay. That is awesome.
That is so awesome.
So we have degrees of awesome. That's the so awesome.
Yes. Yes. Well, I'm Nancy Iannone in Lake Havasu City, Arizona, and my awesome is that I actually can see the end of my first semester of graduate school for my MSW program. I can see it ahead of me because it's like I have a lot to do to get there, but I'm already thinking I only have 4 semesters of classwork before my internship, so I've almost got one done. That's very exciting.
So are you schooling all those young pups that you're working with?
Careful now.
I learn a lot from everybody because they're from such diverse backgrounds, and they all work in different areas of social work that I don't know anything about. So I think having the mix of ages and backgrounds makes for a really rich learning environment. I love it.
How big is your class, Nancy?
There's 52.
Oh, wow.
But we don't all want. Usually there's about 15 in a particular class, so we have a lot of good opportunity for interaction.
Very good.
And hi, Jane.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jane.
You want to do an awesome, or want to wait and gather your thoughts?
I just have a couple of little ones. I think it's awesome.
And introduce yourself too, Jane. I'm sorry.
I'm Jane Garson, Leadership and Ethics Consultant in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I'm up to 4 to 5 quarts of raspberries per night in my garden. Along with a quart of Jostas and some gooseberries and snow peas. So that's pretty awesome for a Toronto garden in a city.
Yeah, I have seen Jane's garden. I've seen her berry garden, and it's like this massive orchard that there's these little tiny berry trees everywhere. And Yeah, I was there when it wasn't this time. It was a little later, I think, that we were there, or maybe it was this time. But there was certainly plenty of berries out there.
You were here during berry season.
Yeah. So it's
Apart
pretty.
from that, on the weekend I got a note that somebody no one in my community had ever heard of was visiting from Ireland, flying back Thursday. And was there any chance he could get to make music while he was here? We managed to get 14 people together on a Wednesday evening to meet a complete and utter stranger. I think that was pretty neat for our community.
Amazing.
That's awesome.
It may have been the mention that there'd be raspberries.
Yeah.
I want to also remind folks that if you are watching today, please tweet in "You're awesome." Let us know that you're here. Use the hashtag CTFuture, and I am monitoring that, and will make sure that your input, comments, awesomes, reflections are incorporated and included in our thinking and our discussion today. I will go next with my awesome. I'm Dimitri Petropoulos, co-founder of Creating the Future. And I have a couple of awesomes. First awesome is sitting next to me, which was my awesome last time, but it's been a month that Candace has been here, so we're kind of celebrating her 1 month anniversary. And I will say what I have found really awesome about that, other than the amazing longevity, is that she's a very quick study. And it's really interesting to watch someone, and this was, I was sort of teasing Nancy about schooling them. I may know how to do something, but she knows how to do it after I show her, and does it 4 times faster than I do it. So that's pretty awesome. So that's amazing. And the other awesome, and this was something I wish Gail had been here, because I know she's very much involved in her local farmers market. But we have a farmers market here that just recently, it's a farmers market organization. So they run a number of different farmers markets around town on different days of the week. They recently became a not-for-profit and a community benefit organization. And they, as of last week, moved to what's going to be an amazing new facility on the county facility, basically. So they've been in a shopping center, and it's been sort of difficult because the shopping center will, well, you know, you can't be here and you can't be there, and you know, places all kinds of rules on it. Yet when the farmers market's going on, there'll be like, you know, 1,000 people that show up on a couple hours over the course of the weekend to go to the farmers market. That aside, the new facility is going to be absolutely amazing, and is going to move it to a whole new level. So that's really awesome to have that in the desert. So this is you know, farmers market where you don't picture, you know, that kind of produce, but there is enough around here to have some pretty decent farmers markets. So that's my awesome.
Yes, I am. My awesome for this week is, this is the first week where I've experienced the monsoons of Tucson. Oh, I'm Candace, by the way, operations coordinator at Creating the Future in Tucson. Yeah, that's been kind of a treat, because I really miss being around water since I'm from Minnesota, and I'm in the desert. So it's been fun to like see the storm like build up and the sky turn dark, and then in a matter of hours it'll dump either on the whole city or just like one little pocket. So I think that's pretty awesome, and I love the smell of the after rain. So
the desert has a very distinct smell.
Does.
Which some of you have, if you've been out in the desert, it's usually creosote that you're smelling.
Yeah, it is.
And it's very distinct. And a quick aside on that, I don't know if you know this, when the kids left town, one of the things that I know Hildy had sent them was little bundles of creosote branches wrapped up to hang in their shower. So when they take a shower, the moisture in the air makes it smell like rain at home. So
Right.
it's that distinctive.
Yeah, my daughter-in-law in Iowa always says the rain doesn't smell right, because she grew up in Arizona, and it just is lacking.
So what we don't have in forests and tons of water, we make up for in smell.
Yep.
This is great. Well, we're here to work on the, I guess, the final, hopefully the final, but if not, we certainly can have another meeting to talk about our engagement strategy. And I want to start out today by kind of reviewing what our process is. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look back at the previous or the blog post that relates to this, where Hildy did a summary of the last meeting, so that if you might want to take a look at that. And for folks who are watching, that's if you're watching, then you're watching it through the blog post, and you can go back and take a look at that. So we really have 4 steps that we're looking at here. And I've got my little cheat notes so I don't forget. We need to identify where people are and what their experience will be. So this is for Annette and Stacy. An integral part of the process is knowing where people are. So we're really looking at that. That's an important component. We need to identify what success would be for them and for creating the future, and what this engagement process can make possible for creating the future and for them. And we need to create favorable conditions for that success to occur. And once we've created once we've determined what those favorable conditions are, we need to create action steps to bring those conditions about. So and this process is basically the causality process that we use for everything that we do. And I just wanted to remind you and to let folks who are watching know what our process is and what we will be doing. So given that, we have done, and I'm going to pull up my notes to look at our last session. But I'm opening it up to comments and discussion and whatever from you guys.
Well, I read this beforehand, and of course I look at it through my lens, as we all do, and I'm thinking, what would re-inspire, reinforce skills, build confidence, and so on. And so I'm curious, with the question that I came with, are you guys incorporating any kind of like buddy chat or anything into the new website? I assume you're using WordPress, or are you changing that?
We haven't come to a final decision on what we're going to do.
Okay.
It will probably be WordPress because of its ability to do the real-time stuff easily, to have someone without HTML do that. But there are some other potential platforms out there, and don't want to rule anything out.
Yeah, I love Squarespace. I haven't checked into their community component. It's much easier than WordPress. WordPress to me, it's kind of a high maintenance platform in some ways. Although I do love it, so that's one question I have.
When we get down to the steps.
Oh, I thought we were doing steps today. I'm sorry.
Well, we to a certain degree, but it would be good to review where we are on all of these.
Then I will sit back and relax and listen.
I appreciate your comments on Squarespace. It's one that I've been looking at. So I think today, Annette, that we're really going to be working on determining who to engage.
I thought maybe I misunderstood from the notes, but I thought that from the notes that the fellows are who you.
Right.
We talked about engaging first.
I meant how to engage.
But in the last meeting, we had also talked about that there were other groups like funders and we just didn't get to that in the discussion because we had identified 2 or 3 others, and we just didn't get that far in the discussion about who to engage.
Well, I've been thinking about the mentorship concept that came up last time, and that idea about. And I was just thinking, you know, well, why don't you pair up, you know, fellows with more senior fellows, and you know, a more like that kind of a mentorship model. But there's nothing to stop you from pairing up fellows with funders and fellows with, you know, across those kind of traditional lines. And those kinds of, that might give fellows an opportunity to kind of, in a safe kind of experimental space, talk through the creating the future language with some of the people we really want to target, like funders, and also really learn. And mentorship is a little bit of a safe space to kind of make mistakes and say what you think and learn together.
So are you suggesting that you're talking about engagement for the fellows?
Yes, but here's the thing, is there's nothing to stop you from things doing double duty. So wouldn't it be interesting to reach out to funders and say, you know, we want to mentor our fellows, and we want to have, you know, people who have been in the field to enter into that conversation with our fellows about how to create the future together, how we all work together. And we know, and so you could pair people up with funders. You could invite executive directors of organizations. You could invite people who are in the field, the people that creating the future wants to target anyway, and pair them up with your mentors. So you are, and that might be a really interesting way to both get the message where you want it to go and provide fellows with a really rich learning experience. If you did it that way, you would need to do it time limited, and you would need to set up a system where people would set up mutual goals. And we've used a system with that in integrating new immigrant volunteers into volunteer organizations, and we found it really, really effective.
Now, were you, just a question, thinking of this as obviously the double duty part tells me not, but I just wanted to be clear because what I heard early on was like a membership. Were you talking about that, Stacy, or you weren't talking about an exclusive, like walled garden kind of thing?
Yeah, I was thinking mentorship in terms of pairing up 2 people to support in the process of kind of supporting the mentor into their leap from learning to being in the world. And so instead of pairing with, you could also pair with other mentors who have, you know, been consulting and doing the work longer, but you could also be pairing them up with, and it would be interesting if you focused on clients who had already been through a process. So we're familiar with creating the future and knew what that was like. And
okay.
I think there's a lot of potential in what you're talking about, Stace. I mean, our first priority may be to the newer fellows to make sure they have a mentor, but if there's enough volunteers, expanding it would be great, or people who've mentored a new fellow then want to do something different the next round. Yeah. I'm not sure if you'd want to connect them with the potential funders of creating the future so much, because that may be something that should be done through the board members and not those most closely involved, but just to connect with community foundations or whatever
Yeah.
would be great.
So we're looking at, I'm looking back at the notes from the last meeting.
I was just doing that too.
And
Me too.
and what I'm looking at, coming up with action steps around the things that were determined last time as what engaging for our fellows would make possible for them. And Stacy, what you're suggesting here certainly falls into that, reinforcing their skills, building confidence, certainly as far as the fellows are concerned, and we were focusing on the fellows. And actually, I think that's something that addresses many of those conclusions or those points on what it would make possible for the fellows. Any other thoughts on that, and what else that might make possible?
Well, as I was listening, I was thinking, two of the pieces. Well, there were two pieces. I think what Stacy's presenting is a really strong sort of amplifier of engagement. It starts looking at what it means to have an engaged community and that, and building those relationships. And it to me is, with regard to, from the fellows' perspective, it is strengthening their understanding of the context that they're working in.
Right.
That, if we're talking about stronger communities, it's always that question: what do stronger communities look like, and what does the community think that is? And I think the more that fellows can be engaged in that kind of a conversation, the better they are grounded in the work. I think there's the two pieces that I'm seeing are that context and strengthening that for fellows, and obviously the ripple out that has to the community. And then I also see another piece, which I don't want to take us away from that, but there's also the component of the actual practicing of this by fellows in their day-to-day. But obviously the two are intimately connected, but I feel like what you're describing, Stacy, is a really nice way of thinking about how to expand that context component for fellows.
And the other way,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The other way that it could support fellows is, one of the things that you want to do once you get out of your learning process is start to establish those professional networks in your community that will generate work, that will get your name out there so people know what you're all about and what you can do. And that would probably be a quicker way to establish that than pairing up with another fellow who is essentially doing the same work.
So, Justin, can you flesh out a little bit more, because I'm trying to see this as action here, what you're talking about, or actions.
Well, I think, in terms of what Stacy's describing on that side of, it's thinking about how we support strategies for those types of conversations. Stacy's talking about that desire to reach out into the community, to hold conversations with people who can help frame that for you as a fellow, and thinking about how, I'm just sort of thinking in those terms of what would fellows need in order to feel like they could, pick up the phone and call whomever those key community members are, what, be they funders, be they heads of capacity building organizations, be they, presidents of colleges, whomever, kind of I don't want to be as rigid as saying what's the script, but as a tool set to help support them, which I actually think then it brings it back to that mentoring piece, which is by connecting fellows together who have done that in the community, for people to learn from that, is to say, oh, okay, here's how somebody else did it.
Can I propose an action step maybe to dovetail with what you're saying, Justin? And what we're doing right here, I mean, it's basically, it could be used as a platform. We can have basically a panel of senior fellows, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, covering a topic. And people could listen in. I mean, that would be a very simple thing, because as you're talking, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, how are these really busy people going to fit one more thing into their busy schedule? And I mean, I have bottomless needs when it comes to, I'm curious like nobody's business, and I suspect a lot of people are, and so you wouldn't want to bother your mentor constantly. So how could we make it streamlined so that everyone has access to it and access to the information, and maybe put out there, what do you have questions about, and then have a panel that we can watch that talk about that. Just one thought as far as fairly easy action step.
I like that, because it means that different perspectives will get brought forward, not just one.
Yeah.
Any one mentor is going to have one perspective depending on their background and their community. And I don't really want to limit this to my own community. For one thing, most of Canada doesn't have any fellows yet. We're only in 3 provinces out of 10, and none of the territories. So I don't want to be looking at just what we do locally in this. So that's a pretty neat idea.
I see this tying in with some of the conversations that we've had in various groups previously, including the faculty, about fellows expressing needs to continue to have opportunities to practice, which the mentoring certainly comes in there. We've talked about having a group available that would meet, and people could come and bring their questions if they're struggling with a particular aspect. That's not quite exactly what Stacy was talking about, but it's another piece of that discussion that's been happening about what the fellows, some of them feel like they need to engage. And then the other leg of that is other safe spaces to practice that aren't time specific. And what would that look like?
I think it does link to what Stacy's talking about, though. Maybe she'll jump in and correct me. But this is one way to actually find out who has already been doing this kind of outreach and ambassador work in their communities, and for them to share how it's been working so that others could move on to what Stacy proposed.
I agree, Jane.
You know, best practice or wise practices, what's worked.
But I'm also hearing the mentoring piece about just practicing the skills, not necessarily the outreach, but we have not just people who have left immersion who don't have as many opportunities to practice as they would like, or not in a supportive environment, or they get into issues. We've had some of them in the forum where people, Justin's really good about putting himself out there and saying, so I just walked away from a situation where I'm struggling with what the next step is. Can we toss this around and think about it? I'm hearing that also as a recurring mentoring need.
I agree. That's why we need more than one group.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just adding that as another need.
This isn't an everybody comes to the same one session.
Right.
I think there's different topics and different volunteers to be at different sessions, and the faces that we'd see would be both experienced and newer people in each of those sessions, I hope.
So that the not time limited, that other piece, because I'm seeing all of these fitting together as as different aspects of engagement that fellows have expressed would be helpful and ways
Yeah.
to get them more connected. And Gail and I and Dimitri and I have had a little bit of discussion about, technologically what could safe space look like. And I'm sure there are lots of ideas about how that might work to create spaces where people, if there's not a panel meeting that they can make, that maybe they want to post something that they've written, that they're practicing with, that they'd like some feedback on. What are the many ways that we can create places that people can step into engagement?
I want to remind everyone that in the post for today's session, there is the preconditions for success for fellows.
Yep.
And to kind of look over it, because I think that, Stacy, the mentor idea, at least, and sort of merged a little bit with what Justin was suggesting, addresses many of these components.
Yeah, I was thinking about sorry.
Go ahead.
I was thinking about what systems you could put in place from the immersion course through to support something like this. And so what if, and I think this probably happens in some form in part of the course already, but what if fellows identify from within their community who those community leaders are, who those foundation leaders are. So one of the assignments is, who are your friends and potential allies in creating the future in your community. So now you've got a list. And as a fellow graduates, wouldn't it be interesting for creating the future to kind of send out a celebratory, you've got a Creating the Future fellow in your neighborhood now, isn't that amazing? And what does that mean, right? And that goes out to that list, and there could be some way of engaging that or linking that back to a mentorship opportunity where, you get a brand new fellow, kind of quasi-intern, quasi-mentor, but in the spirit of creating the future, the invitation is, we have a fellow coming into your community who desires to, work through the Creating the Future process and create some collaborative, positive change. Who's on board with that, right? Who wants to be a part of that, and who wants to, learn about what the Creating the Future is while being a guinea pig for a fellow coming out into the community. So you could set it up a little bit like that, and then have the cohort of fellows who are all doing that at the same time have that very meaty assignment to kind of come back together and process and chat about. And you could bring in some additional fellows to kind of support that and troubleshoot that as it goes. But what you would do is that would mean that every fellow that comes out of the program becomes intentionally seeded into their community as a Creating the Future ambassador with a network that they have identified themselves as wanting to build and connect to, and a relatively powerful invitation backed by the Creating the Future brand for the community to link to. Does that make sense?
It does.
When I say it and when I see it in my head.
I love that you use the word ambassador, Stacy, because that's been occurring to me as you were talking. That we're not offering necessarily to mentor everyone that we connect with. In some cases, we're ambassadors for the approach, for the framework.
For the folks here who are fellows and who have some understanding of the continuum of potential, not every fellow, I think, is ready to be at a particular point in terms of this engagement, and not every person being engaged is ready to be mentored or to be ambassadored or to be anything more than acknowledged. So I just want to make sure that whatever steps come out of this include that sort of range of approaches and range of activities within the safe space and the I think that the keywords that Gail was using last time was humility and vulnerability. After her discussion with Alex, and he was and so I think all of that is really important in terms of meeting people where they are, I think.
Which I'd like to build on as an action step, because it is occurring to me more and more as we talk, we don't know where most of the fellows are. I think there's an action step here of mapping. How are you already involved? But every fellow would probably say, oh, I read the emails, or I check out the blogs or something. So make them remind them, yes, you are still part of the community, even if we haven't heard from you in 2 years. What kinds of things are you doing in your own community to build on? What kinds of activities which activities might you be willing to consider getting more involved in if you had the right toolkit to make it easy for you?
Well, and Jane,
that's the person taking notes and hoping that there's an action step over for Candace in this.
But that does also speak to the discussion we had at the last meeting about sharing stories.
Yeah.
Because that's also a piece of that. What have you been doing both that you've had great success in using the Creating the Future process, and where could you use some support? So both aspects of that.
Yeah, and then we'd have our topics for all sorts of possible discussions.
So in talking about sharing the stories, because I'm struggling with, I think, a lot of the pieces here, because I think, just as Dimitri had shared, not everybody is sort of ready to go out and present themselves in the community. And Stacy, I loved what you described. I mean, it was just, I was thinking about, this ability to come in and you encourage people to either sit down and have a conversation, or maybe they're willing to have a convening, or that. But then it did dawn on me, and I said, I know in my own experience that there's a flak jacket effect, which is not every, no matter how much you pay attention to the continuum, you go into these, spaces, and not everybody's ready to hear what you're talking about. And the idea that I know we talked about last time, which is, wow, it looks so easy when you do it. And where that is actually heading in terms of the story I want to share. So obviously Gail is not on the call, but Gail and I have been talking a lot. Obviously we're connected because of the board service for Creating the Future, but I actually am going up on Thursday to observe her as she facilitates the piano board. We sort of, it was an opportunity, and I said, hey, wait a second, I need to do this. I need to see this more. Not only do I need to practice it, but I need to see it more. And again, where this is heading is, and it ties back actually to the earlier comment, which is, if we can figure out brings at least fellows together in a conversation, whomever it is. So right now it's Gail and I who are having a conversation. And every time we end a conversation, we're like, why did we not record this? There was so much that came out of this. And then it leads to that idea of, a panel and bringing them all together, that if we could create some intentionality around, hey, we want you to spend some time talking with another fellow. About what your experience is. It's a intimately safe space because it's just the two of you. I think it addresses that safe space issue. But there is an expectation that you will share out what you are coming to understand, what you're starting to see as patterns that can be shared out to the fellows, and I think to Stacy's point, which is I don't want I'm not fully comfortable with all of my vulnerability being totally public. But if I have a space to process that in partnership with someone else, whom, I mean, Gail and I come together and we're like, we don't know what we're doing half the time. This is not easy, even though we try to make it look as easy as possible. And then have a space to say, okay, in public, can we bring out the learning that we've had, not only for other fellows, but also for anybody else. I think, going to what Stacy was saying, anybody else who's interested in this, to say, there are people thinking like this and doing this in your community. Here, look at what they're talking about and what they're struggling with. Because, and this is just my last comment on that, because one of the things that Gail and I we were talking about last night was what happens when someone who practices in this way works with an organization, but the organization is on its own continuum, where you may have one or two people who sort of get it and want to try it, but they're sort of left, they're kind of left out there. The organization was, in yellow, they're in purple. What can they do? What can they do as individuals? They're not fellows, they're just the executive director or the program manager. And what resources do they have to follow up what the fellows do? And so it's sort of building on the fellows' success, of saying, how do we make it so that a fellow can actually feel like they've gone in, done something, and that there's actually traction. So I just said a whole lot, so I'll stop.
I want to add two things to that, Justin. I think that's fabulous. That's absolutely fabulous. One is sometimes you are having an impact and you don't know that you're having it because the impact doesn't manifest till quite a bit later. Yeah. And I'm thinking about Pano as an example. Gail was there, quite some time ago and felt that she was not successful, and all kinds of stuff happened after that, but not at that time. So sometimes the seeds you're planting can really sprout later. I wanted to talk about something in relation to what you're saying and also to what Annette was saying. I want to mention that there is a way to do, and this is fairly new, but there is a way to do a Google Hangout, have it be recorded, and have it be private. So that private recordings can be created that are by private link or even only accessible by one person. So
Dimitri, you can also set up a Google Plus community that is completely private, and the discussions on it are not searchable by Google. They don't come up.
Great.
Yeah, we had to do that for one of my organizations because there were a lot of federal civil servants involved who wanted to be able to discuss ethical issues related to their public service work, but of course could not do it. If there was any chance, they could be Googled and found out.
Right.
So we checked, and it's possible, and we have it running.
Well, what I was thinking about in terms of the video was the panel idea of having fellows be able to talk about something, and then when Justin, you said, I wish we had such a great discussion, you and Gail, we recorded this. I'm thinking, well, if there's an easy way to do that, if no one else, just for you two to be able to go back to it. What I have found in watching everything from a board meeting to a meeting like this is, man, I missed a lot. When I go back and revisit, I think I got everything, or at least I think I got the major ideas, and what I miss frequently is there'll be an underlying theme. Something is going on almost thematically. And that's what becomes apparent if I have the opportunity to go back. So I think that might be along with what Jane is suggesting, might be an action step here, is to create those tools for people to be able to do that.
So after listening to all of this, I keep coming back in my mind to what are the systems that we can create that will enable what are the action steps we can now take that create those systems that connect people, which also ties in with what Stacy was talking about, because some of those fellows may be desiring to reach out to mentors who can help them with those connections. That is an important aspect of what some people are hoping to learn. So Justin, I think what you were saying really tied a lot of those thoughts together for me about, so then what would it take to create those connections? What will those steps look like?
Do you guys have a LinkedIn group for your fellows?
No.
Because that might be a way to do it. That also, would naturally allow people to network into their communities as well.
Stacy, I don't think you can create that as a safe space. I think anybody can see the LinkedIn discussions.
No, you can create closed groups.
You can create closed groups where nobody can post, but some of them at least you can still see the discussions.
I don't think so. I think some of the ones are in closed groups that only I'm seeing the discussions.
Okay, try Googling for unique phrases and see if.
Why don't we look at that as a research step? I mean, let's have that be something that we can look into in terms of what the platforms are. Jane, you talked about a Google Plus group, and I know that we can have a private group in Facebook, and we have listservs, and for all I know, there's 10 others out there, ways of doing this. So I think the specifics can be part of an action step as research, which they are. And by the way, hello, Gail. Welcome.
Hi, Gail.
Hi, everybody. Sorry to be so late.
No
we
problem.
missed you.
All right, you got 30 seconds. What's your awesome?
Oh, it's just a freaking gorgeous day in Guelph, Ontario, and there's a lot of really cool work going on, and so I am one happy little cat.
That's wonderful. And you can extend that to a minute if you want. No, I'm just kidding. However much time you want to take.
I do apologize for being late. And Candace, if you and I could put our heads together after this meeting, I'd sure appreciate it.
Got it.
Thank you. Nice to see all of you.
Good to see you.
Yes. So it seems to me that there is no shortage for the connecting technology, and I think Stacy, to your point, there is a listserv for the fellows that's probably underutilized, and I think it actually begs the question, which is it's not the platform, it's the process, and how we seed that and create the expectations of what we want to see. And I don't know if some of that is again thinking about a couple of different models to try that exist. Certainly, Gail, I used us as an example of having all these individual conversations that keep kind of bubbling up, epiphanies for us, and what it would be like to share those out to the fellows. And Annette had talked about this idea of having a panel of fellows together who can talk about whatever the issue of the day is. And I think, Stacy, you brought up a really good one, which was sort of that engagement and networking in the community. And so, is that first step to just start encouraging fellows, and those of us who are fellows, committing to grabbing someone else, a fellow to talk to say we want to just explore our practice with the intentionality that what we not only are we here to support each other, but the intentionality is that we want to take something that we learn and bring it to a panel, I think, as Annette said.
Wow. That is so powerful in thinking about the personal connection you're talking about, because so often when someone comes to you and says, I want to work with you, versus there's a listserv that you can comment on, that immediately changes my engagement with that, my participation with that. And it also creates an expectation, and if you're doing this in a format that is repeatable, that someone could play it back and watch it, it creates a whole sense of energy. That it becomes the Fellows show. I wonder what the next episode of the Fellows show is. When we last left our Fellows, they were on a desert.
Can I add to that? As I'm listening to all of you guys talk, one of the things I think it's important to keep in mind is that we don't get too scattered. I'm hearing listserv, blah, blah, blah. And to me, you're already using Hangout. So creating a private Google Plus group just makes sense. It also makes sense for people to connect through LinkedIn, but for a very different purpose. I mean, even creating a group through there, but it would be a different purpose. And having all of that, and the reason I asked about the website, it's not to be pushy, I know everyone has lots to do, is because one portal can bring people to all of those places.
Right.
And not everyone loves technology as much as some of us, I have learned the hard way. So I'm just saying, I mean, that's my thought as I'm listening, is to simplify. And I'm not it's been a long time since I loved listservs. I will own that right away.
Matt, can I give you a high five, a geek high five?
Yeah, I'm on it. Yeah. It's been a painful process trying to get people to love technology as much as I do, and I have just frankly learned to meet people where they're at. Well, I'm trying my best. Yeah. So that's just my feedback. Facebook.
I also want you to know that part of what's happening with the website is we have been working on what the look and feel is going to be, what the logo is going to be, and that's about to go out to not open source, but a community bid process where artists and designers can take those words, take that energy, and create images for it. Once we have that, then we can begin putting the platform together as to what that means. But we haven't really devoted any energy toward that, the website, until we knew what it was going to be. And so I just wanted you to know where it's at, and that I agree with you completely. I think having the website be a hub for portals of different types is really, really a powerful tool that we're not using at all to its degree.
Yep.
No, we knew it was in process. It's gotten very hard to find things, in fact, on the current site, but you can't do a lot of enhancements on the current one and still have the energy to create something new and wonderful.
Right.
Well, I think if you use it as a portal rather than as a place where you have everything, then you can be really clear about what's there and what are the portals we use for conversations, etc.
Well, it is to a degree that, and I'm not defending. It is to a degree that it's just not clear.
I recognize that, Dimitri. I'm not in any way saying it's.
No.
Thinking out loud for the next, the 2.0 version or 3.0 version, as we're constantly developing and growing. That's my thought.
Yes, yeah.
As the latecomer to the meeting, I just wondered if what I'm hearing is a lot of the criteria that would need to be included in developing perhaps some kind of job description, whether it be paid or contributed in other ways, the effort be contributed in other ways. But are we talking about the criteria for some kind of work that would be aimed at facilitating how people in this community come together in deeper and more fulsome ways?
That's a great point.
The only thing, Gail, is that Stacy took us beyond our community, or
sure,
beyond definition.
whatever. Yeah, yeah. yeah, whoever it is that we're engaging, are we talking about some of the pieces that would need to be in place in order for that role
Yes.
to be successful?
Yes.
And I think going beyond the community you know of, so are there strategies where you can find out who is already curious about or using the concepts of creating the future through their exposure through reading or through watching this kind of thing? So each fellow is coming from a community that at least has produced one person who's heard of creating a future, that fellow. You can assume there are other people who have heard of creating the future who may even be actively using it, using the tools and the ideas in their practice or in their, you know, in their foundation work or as a board member or as an executive director. If you, with the introduction strategy, you could try and set it up in a way that invites that hidden community to come forward and wrap around that fellow. That becomes the safe community space, and also becomes a way to kind of create little mini networks of people who are already know about and interested in what creating the future is all about. That becomes a way of finding who exactly your early adopters are in that community.
Right.
That's the tool that you pull mentorships from.
Have we moved to, I'm not sure who's facilitating today, but have we moved to considering the highest potential for those who are not in the fellows group? Or have we moved on to that yet?
No, we have not.
Okay.
Dovetail with that, can I ask a quick question? Because I don't know, first of all, as far as I understand it, to qualify to be a fellow, you have to do the intensive, correct?
The immersion course, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, the immersion course. And what different kinds of immersion courses are there? I know there's one for consultants. I know you've done one with organizations, and it sounds like you do them with boards. But what about for people? I mean, I can think of 5 people off the top of my head who would love to do it, but they work in organizations. They don't meet any of that criteria. And so is there a criteria, and is there a plan? Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, there is 2 that we've done. One that we've done consistently, which is for consultants. And the thinking behind that initially and why that was designed is that the consultants are like Johnny Appleseeds. They go from organization to organization, and they're spreading the philosophical language, approaches, questions, has a much broader impact than individual organization. We've also done a couple of change maker classes where it's people within organizations. They could be executive directors, or they could be anywhere in between, and a lot of that dealt with leading from the middle, and which also talks about the question that came up earlier, and I think Justin, you were talking about it. You know, you go to an organization and you've got 3 out of 10 people who are purple. What do they do now? You know, they're not. How do they work in that organization? So, but each one of these classes, so far, the limitation has been Hildy teaches these classes, and they have to be designed, and they're each different. They're similar, but they're different. So that has been the. So 2 different things. One is those classes have to be designed. The bandwidth has to be there to be able to do them, and the interest has to be there to be able to do it. And the interest is a matter of communication. So letting people, because you say you've got people who would happily do it. I'm sure there's lots of people out there who would happily do it.
Yeah. But I also work, you know, I work in a field where I got to say, majority of the money spent on consultants is for fundraising stuff, and you know, and that's to me is a barrier, because that's not the kind of consulting I do. I'm interested in effectiveness. And so it's a completely different conversation. And so, yeah, I have questions about it, and I'd love to talk at a later time with people who have thoughts about
that. The last class is for social entrepreneurs. And looking at doing for people who, because we have not seen this work as being restricted or limited to the community benefit sector. It's anyone who wants the world to be a better place. And social entrepreneurs, you know, I mean, they're doing this. They're doing the work they're doing because they want it to be a better place, and they see their model as being, you know, we're going to make banana covers, and you know, 10 cents from each banana cover is going to go toward, you know, slip and fall prevention. You know, whatever your thing is, but clearly having the same approaches. But that class has to be written. That has to be performed, and so it's one of the reasons we've been doing working on creating an education track for teaching, so that there can be others who are able to do this. And you know, we've got a couple of folks now who are in this track who teach an immersion class.
So there are two big things that are popping into my head. First, to this conversation and what Annette is asking, because we've been talking about the after immersion fellow much more strongly than we've been talking about the pipeline fellow. And I think to Annette's question, and this is totally my bias, which is it's a framework and process. It doesn't matter who you are or what your position is. And there may be that, you know, one of our action steps is to consider how the framework is framed so that it is not creating barriers in the way that Annette felt it was. I think that's a perfectly legitimate. Like, who, you know, I think there are people who want to do this, but they may not see them in that space. So I think that that's one component. The other thing, though, just as this is somewhat of a reflection, but also just, you know, I have the preconditions sitting in my head, and, you know, Stacy, I think, you know, you brought us out of the fellows into that community context, and when we think about the overall engagement plan, it actually dropped me back to say, if what we're talking about, I mean, if we agree that developing a system where we can, and I don't even see it as a mentoring system, I see it more as a partnering system, where we can facilitate fellows being able to talk with one another to create the safe space they need to explore their practice. We figure out the means for amplifying and bringing that up a level for the fellows to learn from each other. But also, that's where we begin to open up the public's view into it, that they get to see what this is about. And I then see sort of a higher meta level, which gets to what Gail is saying, which is there's a job function in here, which is if from all of this learning we start to identify themes, like this is how this can transform a board. This is how it can transform a major gifts campaign. This is how we see greater community development and economic development happen. These things, as they come up, as the fellows share their experiences of doing this, we actually begin to create that fishbowl that people can look at and say, oh, well, I'm interested in board development. I wonder how this creating the future thing contributes to that. And that really, on the continuum piece, says you don't have to know anything about creating the future. What you were interested in was a fundraising board. Okay, well, to Annette's point, we know everybody wants that. But if we can then sort of redirect and show people, hey, this is what's happening, and this is how it happens, and this is what the process looks like. It doesn't matter who you are. We can see different levels of ways of engaging it. Suddenly, we've then created the thing that people from the community can look at and begin to engage with. They can decide, oh, we have someone who does that in our community. Let's reach out to them. Or this is what it could mean for a community. And I think that, and I don't know, I didn't see it so clearly until just now, that if we can nail that golden goose egg, it amplifies out to all those other parties we're talking about engagement, because it is the absolute ultimate demonstration component.
If I can add to that, because I'm imagining if Hildy was here, she'd be saying, yes, and that's why I want you all writing blog posts about resource tools for people at different levels of the community.
Yeah.
So those who haven't yet or are working on one that haven't finished, that's important because it does give people something tangible. Just a couple other quick comments. I know Gail wants to talk. And that the courses Dimitri describes as for consultants have had some people attend that were not necessarily traditional consultants. They've been open. There have been fundraising people come, but they've been the kind of fundraising consultants who look holistically at the success of the organization, the kind who could grasp the ideas rather than the I write proposals or whatever. So it's open to them. What we haven't done is map to who's available in the community. I'm going to come back to that. You know, I got one contract because somebody in Toronto phoned Hildy in Tucson and said, we want you to do this consulting for us. And she said, you've got a fellow in your city. Do you talk to them? But there's been no easy way for people to do that. Yeah. To say, who's the nearest person to me that already gets this stuff?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Oh, Gail, you wanted to say something, right?
Now I'm a bit of two minds really on what I was going to share, because I started to, what I was hearing was conversations related to various substreams of what we're referring to as fellows, and I was wondering whether or not we should consider using this, our framework, our conversation framework, to consider the highest potential or outcomes and then conditions for each one of those, rather than kind of mixing it all together, because I suspect that we will probably benefit from our time together if we can focus on that, as opposed to, you know, what our natural inclination is, which is to start planning the details of how to do it. But that, so there's that, and then I'm drawing the line because now I'm thinking about what you just said, Justin, which is, yet if we can figure out what the, as you called it, the golden egg that attracts every single one of those subsets, then we can just focus on that. And now I'm not sure which one I think is important to do.
Well, that we do want to, if we can today, to come up with concrete steps.
Just for our fellows, though, right? Because we're still at fellows.
This round is for our fellows, but what Justin just opened up is the idea that what we're doing is impacts way beyond that.
Right.
And so there, if we can do that in that context, and begin, you know, material steps that we could take now, that would be the most beneficial outcome here. Because what we were talking about in the work that we did is that we're working on fellows today. If we finish the action steps for fellows, then we can spin around and look at the other engagement opportunities, groups, people, whatever, communities, and do the same thing with them. I don't think it's going to be as intense as this is, because we will have, you know, I think there's a lot of overlay in terms of the thinking that will take place with all of them. But this was the one that we strategized as being the first one to, and the key one to work with.
Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it.
I think what I like really about what Justin said is it kind of tweaks with something that has been niggling for me, and that is the language. So when we say mentorship, does it assume a kind of a student-teacher power dynamic, right, where the fellow is the one who needs to be vulnerable and humble, and the mentor is somehow not, because that's not the reality of the world.
Right.
That's not the reality of the world.
And it's the least generative.
And it's the least generative, right? So that idea of, you know, we have a fellow coming into your community, how do we, as a community of people who either are explicitly or already working the Creating the Future model or have been attracted to it and interested in it, how does that community wrap around, connect to that fellow, and be able to both connect them into what's already happening, use them as a resource in terms of somebody who's fresh out of the immersion course with all of the ideas fresh in their mind, and also introduce them to the context of what their community is all about. And then how do you create that introduction and link so in the process you have acknowledged everybody's vulnerability and everybody as a expert and non-expert at the same time, right? How do you walk the talk of creating the future in that we're taking a fellow, we're introducing them into community, not as an expert, but as a resource that can help play these ideas out in the community.
My experience is by the amount of the answer I'm thinking about is that it's the amount of work that we do among the community so that everybody is prepared to be that person who welcomes, who opens the pathway. That it's not just one. There is no one person that you have to know that gets you in. It's everybody, anybody.
Yeah.
And that implies a kind of practice. It implies a kind of program. It implies a kind of work that we have not been able to do up until now because everything has been kind of hinged on whatever it is that Hildy and Dimitri are doing, and we're starting to see that really clearly. We know that there needs to be way more of them.
Can I ask a question technologically again? Because I'm trying to think of barriers to people becoming fellows, because it sounds like you want more in different places. And I'm in love with the idea of a flipped classroom where, talking head stuff is online and you can test out, and the real stuff, the practice, happens in person. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there wouldn't be, it might not be an idea to, at some point, talk about maybe videoing the talking head stuff that doesn't require feedback necessarily, and then coming in, and you have to have completed that in order to come to the actual immersion where the real work happens. Because I'm assuming, I haven't been through, I've read the stuff that's been recommended to me to read, and it completely resonates with who I am, but there's a lot of information that could be shared through a video, hopefully not just a talking head, because that can be boring, but it wouldn't be that hard to do in a week if we had, the camera and the people there to do it. And then that would be done. And then the immersions might even be shorter. Mm-hmm. And forgive me, I haven't gone through it before. I'm just putting that out there.
And that the immersion is not talking head.
No. Oh, there's no information being shared at all.
Primarily engagement, and it's engagement with fellows.
Engagement and role playing.
Right. It is practice.
Okay.
And it is doing it in real time with others who are also there doing it in real time. So you help each other. There is a mentoring that's taking place in it. Mm-hmm. And the purpose, the intent, this has changed from the first immersion courses where there was more talking head, where the materials and whatever are done ahead of time. There is there's obviously an immersion book that you get, like a notebook, but it's not being read or used. It is resource material. There is some discussion that goes on, but it is, for the most part, relatively short. The immersion creates a space that allows you to change the way you be. And that needs, in our experience, it needs time, and it needs intensity. So, doing it 2 hours a day over, I don't think you can do it remotely. I could be wrong.
No. I understand what you're saying now. And so perhaps what I'm struggling with, because I've been working on the video for the immersion from the panel conference, and what I, as an outsider, am wondering about is like, well, how do we get people to understand what immersion is? Because you guys did a marvelous job of sharing enthusiasm. Those of you who were recorded, Justin and Jane, and certainly were there, and Dimitri, I have some B-roll of you. But what's not clear is what's the immersion about, and so how can we at least then create an introductory video that makes people go, wow, I want to have that experience. Now I understand. Oh, because it's clear it changes people's lives. You ask interesting questions. That's really clear. But what does that mean to people? And that's where I'm coming from. That needs to be clear.
And in terms of the engagement stuff we're talking about, I think that's fabulous. And clearly, it was the intent that there would. When I was thinking about this video, and then I want to move back to what we were talking about, but I want to answer your question or answer your thought, is that there needs to be more video. And right along the lines of what you're talking about, that isn't necessarily in a live conference where people are just being interviewed, but actual direct conversation one-on-one with folks talking about the exact things you're mentioning. Yeah.
That would certainly help me understand. I've been watching you guys for a long time. That's why I already have a sense. But I think most people wouldn't grasp it, because I know in the trainings that I do, to get people wooed into it, it takes a minute. You kind of have to shake them up, and hook them in and shake them up. That's kind of what I say in training. To really build that trust and that connection.
I think one of the reasons why Annette, you've put your finger on such an important point when it comes to engagement, and that is it's the why and what's in it for me, what's the outcome going to be, etc. And we really have struggled with that, as well as many other parts of the language about what it is we do. And for me, the only time that I've really started to clue into the pieces of what this immersion program is about is when Alex said those two words, humility and vulnerability, and it spoke to what it is that people are questioning and pondering as they ask the question, can this immersion course be something relevant for me? The question then goes right back to them. To what extent are you exploring that? And here's why. Because we're so reluctant in creating the future to make the immersion course just about learning a new technique. And so the immersion experience is, yes, you're learning a bunch of new stuff about how to do things, but it's in service to your own personal development and growth, and getting, scratching more of the layers off the top so that you can see the heart of the humility and vulnerability that make you a better consultant.
Well, and I think, Annette, to your question, which is such a great why I'm so drawn to that golden egg, is it's not even a promo video. It is, look, see this, see the results, see how people are engaging in this. Is this the kind of thing that you're interested in? And it's not just the outcomes. I think we would, we'd certainly want to ensure that we're highlighting that a lot can be accomplished. There is tremendous benefit in doing this work, but I think, to the point of humility and vulnerability, that, assuming we do it right, that's demonstrated in this process, that we bring that to these, fellow conversations, these fellow, gab sessions and, strategy components where we're demonstrating it, and I think, because one of the things it just jumped out at me so clearly the last time we were talking was that big barrier of, wow, you make this look easy, I could never do it. and our ability to show that no, anybody in the community can engage in this, and everybody will struggle with it, but here's what that struggle makes possible for you. I think then you get people who will say, "Oh, I want to learn how to do this," or I want to be in an experience. I think actually, Annette, to your point, I want to be in an experience where I can practice this, and that points you to immersion, because and this is a business model component of this, but immersion provides you the entree into what you're being able to see all of these fellows doing. Now, granted, you get a fishbowl observation and can learn from the fellows, but and I don't want this to be cliquish, but that's what you get in doing this. This is the kind of engagement that's available and possible to you as a person. And I know there's a balancing there between exclusion and inclusion, but there is sometimes the reality of our business too.
So is the outcome then engagement? I mean, I guess that's what I'm struggling with, is the why. Is it because they want to engage and here's an opportunity for you to engage? Or is it you'll be able to engage more effectively? That's where I'm trying to figure out what is the outcome. Why should they go to an immersion? And I talking to you, I get it, but I haven't pinned down that part because I've been thinking about it a lot as I'm trying to figure out what's missing from the video and what we need more of. And so forgive me if I'm taking up more time than what's reasonable, but I've been really wondering about that because it is part of what the engagement part is.
And I think you've raised a really important point, because that may be something where we don't all agree, but I don't see engagement as the purpose at all. That's a means.
Well, that's the way I usually see. That's to me. I agree with you, but I don't want to assume that that's.
And we're trying to change the world, where people.
Of course.
People have come out of at immersion. If I take one of the two I've been to and quote somebody that was there, he said, because I've been doing this a long time and I'm making a difference, but my community deserves the very best help I could possibly give them, and what I've been doing isn't good enough. The community isn't amazing yet. If I can learn something that helps me go back and make my community even more amazing, that's the purpose of being at the immersion.
So let me see. So what you're saying is, this is a question that can be asked is, are you the kind of person who wants to change the world? Do you want to help change the world? And do you have the tools to do that? If not, we have a process.
Only that I would say that I've found that the phrase "change the world" scares off some people.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. I know.
Would you like to make your community an even more amazing place to live?
Okay.
A lot of people can relate to that. Yes, I choose to live where I am. It's an amazing community, but it could be better. Is there something I could be doing better to make that happen that's worth a week of my life?
So going back to assuming that the immersion course has happened and you've got the fellows, what Justin and Gail are reminding me about the vulnerability and humility question is how powerful those concepts are. What if the process of kind of introducing the fellow back to community, the question that the fellow would bring to community is, what does vulnerability and humility mean to you in your community work? So they're asking foundation people, executive workers, that question. That's the question they're asking, and that question is the question that creates the safe space. Because all of a sudden, you're not coming in and you're not asking about what you do well, what your successes are, what your goals are, how you are changing the world. You're not asking all of those essentially not terribly humble questions. You're asking, how does humility and vulnerability work in your practice? And anyone you talk to in the social services field, in the helping professions, will have run up against that in some form or another. That moment where, you know, they thought they knew it all, and then they found out they were completely wrong, and they carry that forward in their practice after that, and remember not to be so cocky. And those become that becomes maybe a starting place for that support of the fellow, but also the reminder for everyone in the community that that is the best way to approach this work.
Stacy, it's also my screening tool for whether I keep talking to people about creating the future. If you ask people if they'd be interested in learning how some people have found a really great way to make things better in their community, and they basically say, I don't need that, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm fully successful the way I work things. Well, there's probably not much point talking to them. They're not on the continuum of readiness for an immersion course. They're at the red end. For those who've taken the continuum training and know what that means.
And I want to be sure that we are thinking about this from the perspective of everyone. I mean, Justin's talking about the fish tank, where people could see what's going on, because I'm making it bigger than a bowl, Justin. And there are some people who are going to be intrigued with, you know, the coral, and some people are going to be intrigued with, you know, the pufferfish, and some people are going to be intrigued with the whole entire thing. It needs to be addressing all of those. And the immersion is really a very small part of that population. That's, you know, people who are ready to take the immersion, and so that, you know, if it was a large part, we'd have thousands of fellows right now. Hopefully we will soon, but we need to be, and you channeled Hildy for a while there, Jane, going back, you know, we need to have blog posts, we need to have places to engage, we need to have conversations, we need to have this whole spectrum of engagement opportunities that are not only opportunities but also address people at where they're at in the continuum. Full spectrum. Stacy, your focus, or, you know, some of your background is in the social services area. So your perspective that, and the answers need to be, or the opportunities need to be such that people in the social service area are attracted to this. And there's folks who are in the social entrepreneur arena, and they're going to react differently. You know, Jane, you made a comment there reflecting back that you know, some people don't react well to saying you want to change the world. They don't see that in that context. So language is real important. That was one of the things that we talked about last time, is reframing of this I see reframing for the continuum. Where are you on the continuum, and reframe language so that it makes sense to you, and so that it opens the, as Hildy uses the terminology, opens the crack to let the light into the next stage, where people can be thinking about it from that perspective. But you know, humility is would mean not being exclusive.
I'm already using some of our language when I talk to social entrepreneurs here, Dimitri, because I've got the wonderful Center for Social Innovation to practice that, and I've found ways to rephrase some of the questions to resonate with that crowd.
We're at about 30 minutes left here, and I'd like to kind of circle back to you know, what are actionable steps that we can be looking at around the items that we've been talking about today. The idea of a mentor, the creating space for open involvement, or, you know, people could see what's going on. and and some of the other points which escape me at the moment, but I just want to be thinking about what could be actionable at this point, because we'd like to have marching orders, if we can, by the end of the meeting today. Or if you want to keep talking about what you were talking about, that's perfectly fine. I just wanted to kind of alert everyone that we're, I don't want to be insensitive to the timing here. So.
Would it be possible to just have a quick recap of what some of those things have been? That would make it easier for me.
We spend a lot of time talking about the idea of a mentor, of a mentoring program within the fellows. And Stacy brought up the idea of having, fellows being able to mentor other fellows, and potentially being there for the community. That would be the biggest part of what you missed, Gail.
Okay.
Was discussion around that, and I don't think there was anything else that we spent a lot of time on, and you may have notes that say something different.
Well, okay. So in terms of summarizing, mentoring program. I heard online communities. We thought our way through we noted that some of this would become the components of a position description. That it really probably needs to be someone's dedicated work to continue to plant seeds and build relationships and make sure people know that there's lots of space for participating. Is there anything else that you guys heard that sounded actionable?
Well, I don't know what the action steps are, and Justin, maybe you can speak more to this, but I really was struck by your idea of the golden egg, the one place, and it isn't really necessarily a physical place, but what draws people together, and what steps could we take to create that golden egg? And we talked about a portal that would lead in many different directions, but Justin, could you share more? You have any more thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, I think it was really prefaced on the experience of, again, moving away from the idea of the mentorship and more of the, fellow partnerships of, pairing people, building off of that the action step is getting fellows to talk to each other about their practice, to facilitate creating a safe space for them to come together. Again, Gail, I used the example of the experience we're having. Right. And then, so then from there, not just making that connection, but having intentionality that those who engage in those conversations will bring forward their own learnings from those conversations. And then I think that fed into what Annette was talking about, which was, is there a mechanism for bringing the fellows together, if it's monthly or quarterly, to almost, to have a panel discussion where, perhaps around a topic and what people have found to be, we could either identify the themes and say, this month the fellows panel is going to talk about X, and a couple of the people who've had conversations around that are sort of the primary drivers of that conversation, but just to, it's really sharing what people are learning and hearing other fellows' reflections on that, and then that, that being the demonstration. So we're supporting the fellows in their own practice, which I think was a key piece that we talked about in those conditions, was fellows need to figure out how to be safe and successful and vulnerable and everything in actually carrying out this work. That to create that kind of space where we can, and I'll speak as a fellow, where we can come to that space, that engages me. And I'm engaged because I'm actually a participant in that. You know, and then I think so that was the actionable thing, and then by making it publicly accessible, I think then there is the potential to draw out other pieces, such as other blog posts, or even you know, some way of tagging or indexing topics that are being discussed, so that then there's an access point for people to see. And you know, the piece that I didn't mention before, what this really does is it makes it that it's not about creating the future. It's about people practicing the process.
That's great.
I have a couple of thoughts about action items. One is building on Justin's thing. What if like the first fellows discussion or fellows panel was around the idea of humility and vulnerability in our practice? That becomes like the very first thing that, you know, kind of sets the stage for the future discussions. And the other action item I was thinking is that idea of a letter of introduction of fellows to their community, and writing something up, right? Drafting something up that that could be passed around and made better.
Okay, and I'm still going to come back to mapping. That isn't on the steps list. Two types of mapping. One is actually where are our fellows, so that we can, because I don't think we've kept track fully of who's in what community and who's where, but more importantly, where are they at in terms of current engagement with us and engagement they'd like to participate in. And to add what Nancy said at the time, what stories can they share? And I would love to see a Creating the Future video that's just a few story highlights of things that have happened in real communities because of what people learned through Creating the Future and were able to apply with their communities, their clients.
See, and Jane, what you're talking about right there is what I'm looking for. That's what I feel like is missing.
The missing.
Why should I engage? How will it benefit me? I mean, if you just look at the basic model of how we change, is it worth it to me? Is it something I'm capable of doing? If I put in the effort, will I get the outcome that I want? You know, it's just basics.
So, Ned, I was sort of talking about success from the community viewpoint.
Well, of course, it's from the community.
Two different videos. The what's in it for.
Well, I understand you're talking about the community, but the thing that I keep missing is a community is made up of individuals, and in order to get them started, you have to engage the first individual to say, oh, I really care about my community. Oh, so if I engage in this, then I will be successful in doing this in my community. Because it always starts with the individual. To me, that's been my experience. I don't know how to, you know, go out and yell to a community without engaging individual people and saying, "Oh, I love what you're doing. This is so awesome. How can I help you?" And that's my point. And again, back to, you know, saying you want to change the world. You know, I'm a language person, so it's like, you know, it's not about changing the world, and it's not coming from an arrogant point of view at all. It's about wanting to add value to the world, wanting to add value to the community, which is, to me, has nothing to do with arrogance in any way. It has to do with caring very, very deeply. And many people, I think, don't know how to do that. And they don't know that there's actually a lot of power in softness. I believe there's great power in softness. There's great power in vulnerability, because the more people trust you and feel safe, the more they want to engage, right? I mean, that's the way I'm built. So, and it's been my experience other people are as well. With the groups, at least, that I want to engage with. I'm sure there are other groups who don't, but that's how I roll. So I want to, I think,
buck the trend a little bit here, but one of the preconditions that we had was the starfish effect and the shared leadership.
Yeah.
And so I think, while incredibly inspiring to hear sort of the, well, what if we, I'm thinking what I'm really hearing is just as I was talking about, pulling out learnings from individual conversations that pairings are having, it's when those fellows groups come together to be intentional about saying, what can we take from this that would make greater community engagement possible? And I think that goes to what Stacy was saying, if it is the introduction of who we are to our communities, if it is the storytelling from the community perspective, it could be something else. If, again, as we think about constructing the intentionality around what those fellow conversations, those fellow panels are, is saying, it's not just a gab session, it's also us collectively taking a leadership role and thinking about what's the thing that can come out of this? What's something that's actionable, whether it is somebody volunteering to write a blog post or somebody saying, I think we need a story around this, or saying, I just want to go out and yell in my neighborhood what I just did. Whatever that is, if we think about using the forum as the generator of those next steps,
we just had which I think sort of touches upon what you just were talking about. We had a comment from Frank B. This is one of those Twitter handle things, so I'm not sure who Frank is offhand. Frank B. 3Lang 3R. Hi, Frank. And that is that the fees for immersion are a huge barrier. Even with scholarship, I can't afford the travel expenses. And that's, clearly true. We have had immersion classes in different places, so that affects what the travel expenses may be. And it is hopefully something that can occur elsewhere. It is, though, an entire week with meals, so with breakfast and lunch. So it is a big fee, but if you look at it over 5 days,
I think what that does is it speaks to the action for us. Thank you, Frank B., for offering that insight, and it helps us to, if we take that as a challenge, as a problem and an issue, what do we really want then, is the question that we need to be talking about. What is it we really want as it relates to accessibility, and what would it take to get there? So maybe we can put that on the list as something that needs some further consideration, because I'm sure there's lots of people out there who would say the same thing. And I remember the first time that I considered an immersion course. The deal was, though, it was expensive, but I was so damn determined to be part of it that I figured, I don't care. I don't care what I have to do to get there, I'm going. So, and I was fortunate to find, to cobble together some funding that made it happen. But thank you very much for contributing that. That's really appreciated.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to, right now we're sort of defining actionably what engaged fellowship looks like.
Yeah.
And I think it is then the follow-up question. I think, and I think to the point, we are focusing this conversation on fellows, which is just one subset of the community engagement. So I want to make that nod, but I think the issue that Frank raises is once we have an engaged, once we've conceived of what engaged fellowship looks like, then the next question is, how do we engage more fellows?
Yeah.
And that goes directly to the question of, is if immersion is the entree into fellowship or to being a fellow, then just to his question, what are the barriers? What does it need to look like so that more people can engage? Because again, this is not the, this was just one sliver that we took. It's not supposed to serve all of the full engagement that this organization represents in the community.
Right.
So I think we can acknowledge that, but then be clear that there are other follow-up things that we need to be thinking about.
And I would just like to throw in there before we are done, when we're talking about engaging our fellows, we've talked a lot about conversations, we've talked about hangouts, we've talked about the groups, but I also want to be sensitive to the fact that we need lots of points where people can engage, because we have a huge, within our community, a huge pool of introverts who will never in their life do a hangout, but are very engaged in Twitter or in other ways. Online communication is really comfortable for them. They want to engage, but some of the ways that we've been describing are not going to be effective for them. And so how do we make sure, for the people who can only drop in after 10 o'clock at night, for the people who are never going to be comfortable being in a hangout, many of the all kinds of different aspects, how do we make sure that when we're talking about that level of engagement, that there are many different kinds of opportunities for our community?
Nicely put, Nancy.
There was another comment from Frank that he's concerned that, I'm assuming it's a he, concerned that focus on fellows who create an elitist group of only those who can afford to belong. And I think you were talking about that, Justin, and there is a time lag between what we're talking about here and when people actually get to watch it. That is, I think, an important concern, and one that addresses the fact that this is a continuum with people at all different levels, at all different, and also I think about the overlay of the two words that you have been using, Gail, since our board meeting, actually, and how they apply here. And by the way, thank you for your notes.
I don't think we should forget the references Justin made to a pipeline and Annette made to people who maybe don't fit the categories that have been that the courses have been designed around. Anything that we're doing now on fellows has to just be a part one. And Stacy's idea of using the fellows to reach out is absolutely critical. We will never have millions of immersion graduates. That's not reasonable to expect. That's why we want to treat fellows as catalysts and entry points.
And that's, I guess, why I'm curious about having different, I don't want to call them levels, because again, that gets into the whole hierarchy thing.
Right.
But because of course I understand the need for fellows to have a private group where they can talk and feel vulnerable, because you don't want to, you don't want the outside people who need to be confident in you to see that. I get that. But I also think there's a whole slew of people who'd be very interested in engaging with what you're doing, but they may not have the money or the time or the reason to do the immersion, but they may, they may be really interested in what this work is, and is there some entry point for them where they could be a part of a community and it would look different? They would have access to, maybe, like if I'm using the word freemium model, but in that there are different levels of accessibility to content, I guess, where people they can watch certain hangouts, they can read the blogs, they can have their own community. I don't know, because I really think there are a lot of people who want to hear this and want to learn, and there are bazillions of lurkers. I have met so many people, and especially on Facebook, who I had no idea they were even. I'd forgotten they were on Facebook because they never post. And then I just came back from Nebraska, and this person started having this conversation about something I posted a year ago. And I couldn't remember what they were talking about. He said, "Oh, remember when you were talking about you going back and forth?" I thought, "Oh my gosh, oh yeah." And we had this conversation about it in person. But that was the only way they were comfortable doing it. And I think there are a lot of people like that. And they will read. They will read threads. They will read conversations. They will watch videos. But you'll never know they're there. But they do
we
influence
have
their
this
family.
one person tweeting today, "Hi Frank, and we live in the same community. I just checked you out. We don't know each other yet, but we will."
Awesome.
We never know who's using the Facebook and the Twitter chats. Those of
No.
us who facilitate Twitter chats know that there's
Right.
probably more lurkers than participants. So
Right.
I think Creating the Future's been pretty brilliant, actually, at providing a lot of platforms
Mm-hmm.
to get people.
And that one of the other components here is, in order to address people at different levels, we have a flash class coming up this month. We do a flash class every month, and eventually there will be a whole series of flash classes, webinars, workshops, and other ways of other forms of education and engagement up to and including immersion, and who knows what beyond that. I mean, immersion isn't necessarily the end result, but it is, I think, as Jane has been saying, they are a very powerful resource for creating communication and engagement with the world and building that fishbowl.
What do you mean by flash class?
Why don't I go into it? Well, briefly, it is a 30-minute, $10 class, roughly 30-minute, $10 class that is like a webinar, which has materials that go along with it, that a community that can discuss it around a particular topic. And if you look at this month's newsletter, there was links to the current one that's coming up, and there will be others in the future. So there's more. The immersion class is not the only form of sort of engaged education at that level. I mean, someone may just want a newsletter, may just want to read an article, may want to read a blog post, may want whatever. This is a little bit more intense level.
So you can do a flash class without being a fellow?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So
And there you can find them on the website.
Super cheap.
Yeah, okay.
I have to go shortly, folks.
yeah,
Me
I do
too.
also. So I have just a reflection kind of on this conversation, and I went back to look, in the first meeting of this group, and when we think about, the intention here is to engage people not only in changing the world, but also in advancing the mission of creating a future. And so, there were 9 different sort of categories of people to engage, the fellows only being one of them.
Right.
The one that so I think in response to both Frank's question or comment about exclusivity, and I think to some of what Annette is addressing, there's putting that question forward of saying, part of this is also getting the broader community to hit on various touch points. I think that we really tackled the fellows because this is a group of people who've already demonstrated a tremendous amount of commitment and engagement, and we want to amplify and magnify what they have. And I think we've actually talked about in today's session various ways that will not only allow the fellows to become another touch point in and of themselves, that the work of the fellows and them working together in advancing their own practice can serve as a fishbowl, the wide open ocean with your snorkel, that I guess part of it is I just want to acknowledge that this little piece is not meant to be the full and only way of engaging, that I really saw this and I see what we're talking about as a way to serve the fellows, because there was strong acknowledgement about they need to be not only ambassadors, but they need to have the confidence and the experience and the everything to be able to do this, and that much of what we wanted to do was engage a space where they can do that and that they can grow and they can be the ambassador and foster and get more people interested and then amplify that out. So while it may feel like some people are being left out, I think the intention was to focus on this group, not at the exclusion of others,
Right.
but to the benefit of this group in this conversation.
Just for today.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's been the first, and that was the comment, Justin, earlier about once we've got actionable steps here, then we circle around and work on the next group, and basically build an engagement plan for all of the ones that were identified back in meeting one, talking about engagement, and then they would interconnect with each other. I'd like to do a reflection because we are at that point, and my reflection is I just keep thinking about what you were talking about, Justin, in terms of creating this visible world that people, fish tank, fish bowl, ocean with a snorkel, that people can see and see where to connect in it or how to connect in it. And that's a really powerful image to me, and I'm just sort of reflecting back as to, wow, that is a really great outcome for me in thinking about this meeting. Any other reflections today?
I'm just listening and learning and realizing that I just have to be patient with the process. Are you laughing at me?
No, just
Knowing the labs.
Can I share mine then right now, which is when I think back to all the conversations so far in both sessions, and what you just said, Annette, which is what made me smile, was I'm so grateful for, and I think I said this the last time too, I'm so grateful for your participation, for Stacy's participation, because it's so easy for us to get yakking about this stuff because we see so much of it, we're so much a part of it. But when you're bringing your perspectives to this discussion, it just makes it so much richer, and Frank too, it makes it so much richer, so much more tangible, that we're creating something that will, like, I can't wait for both of you to be fellows and get in this thing, this immersion course. But on the other hand, everything you're contributing is just so rich and so valued, and I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think my reflection is probably that this is a great example of how you engage and how you notice when people are interested and passionate about the work you're doing, and then invite us to come in and just be a part of the table as equals, as people who have things to contribute. And I think that's the model you're already using and can be applied just as well all along the line. And my battery's going to die in a second, so if I disappear, that's why.
Well, I'm reflecting that I'm really glad that the themes of last meeting on humility and vulnerability kept being raised.
Continue.
So we don't forget about them. We build that in up front, make that a part of our, an explicit and thoughtful part of our community engagement. I'm also delighted that if Dimitri and Candace are giving direction to people on the website, they can talk about oceans with snorkelers and golden eggs. It's really enough images to choose from, and apparently Justin can just keep pouring those out.
So it's like a big video game, little spinning icons. Click on that.
Well, and my reflection is that I was very struck by what Justin brought up about the one-on-one conversations, the opportunities to come together and speak, and that's exactly what we're doing today. That it may not be just one-on-one, but the power of having the opportunity to come together face to face and actually talk through our ideas, and it's just amazing. So that's my thought for today.
And Candace?
I I'm learning. I don't spell vulnerability correctly most of the time. But what really struck me is when we're talking about social media, that's kind of what I've been focusing on this week at work, is just what and how to use social media, because everyone's at different levels on it. There's dual personalities for every platform that you use. But then, as we were talking, what really struck me is, well, how do you engage people who don't use the technology that we use, who won't be on the internet, won't be on Twitter, won't be on Google? How do you keep them in the loop? So that was kind of like my ending thought. Like, how do I use social media, but how do I not get too focused on it and bring it to the newsstands, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Telephone.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think under our new anti-spam laws in Canada, people will actually be more often phoning each other. More emails and more phone calls, and while the new legislation has produced more spam than we ever had before so far, it probably isn't a bad thing that we're going to pick up the phone more often. It's really badly written legislation. Please do not copy it in the U.S.
Well, we are at our end time. If there are no other comments, I will go ahead and end our little session for today. I think we've got some definite things that we can be working on. Gail, if you wouldn't mind resending that as an email,
Sure.
that would be very helpful. Thank you everyone for being part of this. We will be scheduling additional sessions here to talk about the other components, the other groups that are not addressed, and we'll announce that through the blog post. You guys can do that. So thank you very much for being here. Thank Candace for taking notes and getting those out to everybody, and we'll just be talking to you soon. Thank you.
Wait, and Candace, would you stay on this Hangout just for a few minutes so I can talk to you about the how-to of posting a blog?
Yes. And we'll go ahead and end this video. Thank you, everyone who's been watching.
And thank you, Dimitri.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.